Hello, and welcome to the 86th Annual Annisfield Wolf Book Awards documentary post-film conversation. This conversation is a special program between CIFF Streams and Annisfield Wolf Book Awards as part of the 2021 Cleveland Book Week presented by the Cleveland Foundation. My name is Eric Siler. I'm a professor of film, media arts, and communications, as well as moderator for this conversation. We are pleased to be joined by two people from behind the scenes of this great documentary. First, we had the producer of the documentary, Mary Fecteau. Mary Fecteau joins us from Idea Stream Public Media. Hello, Mary, and welcome.
Hello.
It's good to have you here. Also, we have an associate producer on the documentary, Shelli Reeves. Hello, Shelli, and welcome.
Hello.
Oh, it's great to have you both here. This documentary was produced by Idea Stream Public Media, which is the public broadcasting station in Cleveland, Ohio. And they do a lot of fantastic work for the community and the area. But Mary and Shelli, how did you two get the honor to work on this documentary? Did you have to put in a pitch, a bid? What did you do to get this role?
Well, I guess actually last year it started. I produced a documentary for the Annisfield Wolf Book Awards last year, and it was really a replacement because the Annisfield Wolf Book Awards is usually a live event that takes place in Cleveland every year. But last year, of course, because of the pandemic, that live event was canceled. And so Karen Long, who manages the Annisfield Wolf Book Awards, suggested, well, maybe we can try doing a documentary. And I'm a producer. I do video work at Idea Stream. And a lot of the video work I was supposed to be doing last summer ended up getting canceled. So I was available and I produced last year's show. And again, it was pretty unpredictable with the pandemic. So I think they wanted to have another documentary in place started just in case. And yeah, got to produce this one. And this time I had the joy of having Shelli join me on the road.
Well, that's great. Shelli, I know you work in community engagement at Idea Stream Public Media, but how did you get paired up with Mary to produce this documentary?
Yeah, so last year, Mary did this completely by herself. She flew everywhere. She did the editing, she did the filming, as well as interviewing everyone. And so this year, the idea that I could come and help, and I might have laid a couple of seeds and tried to encourage people that maybe I would be an asset to this project. But really, that is how I ended up on the project. Mary needed a little bit of help, and I had a little bit of time.
Well, it certainly showed the work that the both of you put into this piece. Now, Mary, specifically, talk about your role in the documentary. What did you specifically do?
Well, I, did all the shooting. So I did the video work, and I came back and I edited the documentary, put it all together, and I wrote the first draft of Henry Louis Gates's script and kind of figured out how the documentary would be assembled. I did a little bit of graphics work in the end, and yeah, so I think my role was just getting it put together, basically.
Yeah. And what about you, Shelli? What was your role specifically in this documentary?
So my role specifically was interviewing all of the authors. And so I read all of the books, prepped questions. Mary and I went through those questions, and Mary created questions as well. And then during the actual production, I was the person sitting and asking the questions, responding to the answers from the different authors and asking those follow-up questions. And then when we came back to Cleveland, Mary had all of the footage, and it was pretty much her on her own again. So really, I was the one who was in the field with her.
Yeah, it was absolutely a lot of work doing this. So you actually traveled from city to city, speaking to these various authors and getting all this footage. How long did this take? What time span did this take?
Do you want to start with that one, Shelli?
Yeah. So we interviewed a different author every week for 5 weeks. And then when we came back, it was another additional month of Mary in the studio editing everything. And so it was intense, to say the least, especially because we were reading all of the books as well. So we're reading books, prepping questions, meeting amazing people in their homes and in their towns, and taking B-roll while we're in each of the cities. Additionally, we interviewed past winners. So that also was happening within that 5 weeks while we were traveling.
Yeah.
Wow. Pretty intense 5 weeks, Mary, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I completely forgot that we interviewed past winners in some of the cities. That's the other thing. We kind of like tacked that on in the end because we said, oh, we should have past winners come on and talk about their experiences winning, and that would be a nice little segment to open the show. But it definitely added a good deal of extra work. I kind of have very distinct memories of like, we actually did we walk to Tyamba Jess's house? We walked for, it was sweltering hot in July in New York City, in Brooklyn. And I think we walked back. We were trying to get back to the subway because the lifts are very expensive in New York. And we said, well, we can walk to the subway. And the subway was 2 miles away. And we were carrying all this gear, and
it was a pretty eventful walk as well. So he was like, yeah, you just go down the block and you'll catch the bus. It'll be there any moment. And then the bus was delayed. And then we were like, oh, this is only going to be maybe a half a mile. We'll just walk to the subway station. And it was significantly longer than a half of a mile. It felt like 110 degrees outside, where we have backpacks and we're carrying stuff and it's hot. And when it's hot in New York, it smells bad. So we're just walking through the streets with having really a sensorial experience with the sweat dripping down our necks and the pleasant aromas of New York City in the middle of the summer.
Oh my! The adventures of production. All the stories that we never see, but we just see the final product. Let's move more into the documentary itself. Starting with you, Mary, was there a particular author that you really enjoyed meeting and working and connecting with? Is there an author that jumps out?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's hard because I really did like them all. And I especially loved all their books. I personally really enjoyed the poets. So Victoria Chang and Natasha Trethewey were... Natasha Trethewey won for nonfiction this year for her memoir, but she's a poet. And if you read her memoir, you can see that she's a poet because the language is very figurative and just flows very well. So I think the poets always have good answers too, because they have a way with words. So I think that might possibly be Shelli's answer too, and I might have stolen it, but I'm sorry. But that was my answer too. I think meeting Samuel Delany was an experience too. He's a legend. He's a legendary science fiction writer, although he likes to say he doesn't write for any specific genre, but he was very interesting to meet, and a guy, he's as kind as he is brilliant, which I think says something about him,
And what about you, Shelli? Is there a particular author that stood out to you?
Yes, Mary did take my answer.
Sorry.
As she was saying it, I was like, okay. But both Natasha Trethewey and Victoria Chang, they were really interesting people to interview because of the length of the interview. So we had a lot of time to talk about their lives outside of just the books that they wrote. And as a result of that, Natasha Trethewey and I were both competitive cheerleaders in our past lives. And so we talked about cheerleading. And Victoria Chang, she gave us snacks and made sure that we were hydrated, and we walked through her neighborhood. And so that is why those two interviews stand out so much, is just because I feel like I know them on a very personal level. And then Samuel Delany, it was delightful as well, because we went over to the Philadelphia Museum of Art and just walked around the museum talking about some of his favorite pieces. And I was a museum educator for 8 years. Walking around museums is one of the most comfortable places for me. And talking about art and some pieces that I've read about or I've studied that I've never seen, and see him talk about those pieces was just a moment that I really, truly enjoyed, and am glad that I had that opportunity to talk to him about art. And so those were definitely some of the highlights. Although all of the authors are truly amazing and their books are amazing, but we had a little bit of a shorter time with others.
So some good information there for the both of you. Starting with you, Mary. Every production you both work on, you learn something from. What specifically did you learn from working on this production? I mean, this is a little intense, reading the books, traveling to various cities and interviewing, various authors. So obviously you learned a lot, but is there like one thing specifically you'd like to share with us that you learned?
Wow. I think one thing I learned was that, you can go into an interview or any kind of shooting experience expecting it's going to go one way, but you always have to be prepared for it completely not going the way you expect. And actually, I think of the Samuel Delaney experience, filming with him as one of those. I read his memoir. I read through some of his science fiction books. And so I thought I had a good idea of what the responses to our questions would be. And he turned out a little unpredictable, I think. I think he was someone who, he doesn't have boxed answers. I think a lot of the writers are so used to talking about their books at this point, so they kind of have their answers down pat, He's someone who his answers were a little bit more unpredictable. And so when we got the footage, when I was putting it together, I had to be a little bit more creative in how I put his story together. And I was still able to do it. And I think his came out really good, but it was, I think what I learned is to be prepared you can't ever prepare for the actual, you have to sometimes just go into it like an experience shooting and just, fly by the seat of your pants, basically, because it's not as you expect it to be.
Interesting. What about you, Shelli? What did you learn? It could be production, content, anything. What did you learn from this experience?
So this was my first experience like this. I have not been an associate producer, especially for an IdeaStream public media documentary. I am a community engagement specialist. That's my formal title at IdeaStream. And so in many ways, the entire experience was very new to me. Also, outside of IdeaStream, I do a lot of work focused on history and the history of places specifically. And so to travel to different places and talk to the authors about the specific things that resonate with them, like Victoria Chang talking about what it's like to live outside of LA, or Vincent Brown pulling up maps on his computer screen and literally walking us through, this is where the rebels walked from, and this is where this battle happened, was really eye-opening to see kind of their relationship and see how they're translating the different topics and the different events into their books. Because of course I saw it there, but I didn't see the way that they were processing that information.
IdeaStream does a lot for the community. And what do you feel, I'll start with you, Mary, this documentary has done for the community, or will do for the community?
Well, one thing it does is, I hope it does, is it makes people more aware of the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards, which is, it started in 1935. It's in its 86th year. And this is a big deal in the literary world. I don't think most Clevelanders are completely aware of the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards, but it's the only American book prize which is devoted to books that address racism and cultural diversity. And in the literary world, it's a big deal. it's on par with the Pulitzer. I mean, it's huge. And I don't think most Clevelanders know about this award. And I think this maybe, gives it a little bit more attention, or I hope it does. And then, of course, all of the work that these writers are doing in their books is so important to kind of get that work out there, promote these books and promote the work that's, being done within these books to address racism. And it's especially important now. I mean, it's never not been important, but I think this year, almost as more than any, it's so important to talk about this stuff.
Well, what about you, Shelli? What do you think this documentary does for the community?
It allows for the information and it allows for those interviews to become more accessible. So these last 2 years, last year and this year, by us being able to produce this documentary, people can go on YouTube and watch it. People can watch it on their PBS station, on IdeaStream, Channel 25. And as a result of that, it hopefully is getting to new and different audiences. And I've had so many conversations with people just after Tuesday, talking about the authors and talking about the stories that they told, but also the possibilities that they open up with the stories that they told. The books, they really talk about this moment, although they're not specifically talking about the current events. They resonate with people in so many different ways, whether it's on a personal level because they might have lost someone through the global pandemic, or in a different regard of thinking about the similarities between history and what is happening now in our country. And so not only are the books timely, but they're just speaking to people in a way that is very necessary in this moment. And they're really good books. And as a person who went to the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards way before I was going to help out, it's just so great to be able to share this with more people that I couldn't get in my car and take down to Playhouse Square when it was in person.
Oh, good. Building on what IdeaStream Public Media does, one of the aspects they focus on, especially, is education, and this was definitely an educational piece. I'll start with you, Mary. At the end, you highlighted the teaching artist, which brought us really, made like a real classroom connection to this piece. Can you tell us a little bit about the development of that piece at the end and why you chose to use that moment in the documentary?
Of course. I think it's interesting. Every single year that they have had an in-person ceremony, well, I guess I shouldn't say every single year. I don't know. As far back as I know, they've always had a young poet reading a poem, and it's always a CMSD student reading a poem to open the ceremony. And I've always been like, who is that? Who is that kid? Like, how are they finding this kid? Like, their poems are always beautiful. And so I wanted to include a little piece towards the end of the show to kind of show the development of how a kid from CMSD, how the teaching artist that is hired through the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards works with the students to write these poems. And we highlighted one student in particular named Simone, and she wrote a beautiful poem, and it's part of a poetry workshop that the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards sponsors in the classrooms in CMSD. I think they might be doing, Simone is from Campus International School. So I think they might go to Campus International School every year, although I'm not quite sure. But so this year they did a Zoom thing where they taught the kids about poetry, and they read previous Anisfield Wolf Book Award winners and then have them kind of write poems inspired by past Anisfield Wolf Book Award winners. So they did a really interesting one with a Langston Hughes poem, and they used that to think of a prompt, which then prompted Simone to come up with her poem. The prompt was write something you know about, and her poem is titled People. So she wrote about people, but It's actually pretty profound for, an 11-year-old to, the poem itself is beautiful, I think.
Well, I think so too. I think so too. Shelli, when interviewing the various authors for this piece, I guess after you finish interviewing them, you think about, I should have asked them this or that. And during the editing, not everything can make it into the documentary. Is there any information that you have that's not in the documentary that you think we should know about?
Yes. There's so many different things. And one in particular that I think about is with Samuel Delany. When we were walking around the museum, he was talking about an art piece and it was mesmerizing. It actually brought him to tears. And so he's sitting on a bench. He's looking at this beautiful piece. It brings back a memory of when he saw a piece in New York and he just started weeping. And it was a really humanizing, sentimental moment that shows so much of who he is and shows so much of, in the short few hours that we got to know him, it showed the personality that we were able to learn and appreciate. Granted, it wasn't talking about one of his books or really his life. And so it didn't quite make it in, but it's one of those special moments that I'm going to hold dear for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Very good. Go ahead, Mary.
I was going to say part of the reason we didn't include that was also because I was like shooting a cutaway shot and then like came back to that shot way too late and it was fuzzy and Shelli was in the shot. It was a terrible shot and it was a beautiful moment though. If you listen to nothing but the audio, it's a beautiful moment. But if you see the footage, it's like, what is this garbage?
What about you, Mary? You had to make a lot of editing decisions. So if you had just maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, what would you have put in there for us to see?
I think what Shelli said about the Samuel Delany was one of those moments, although it probably would never have been able to get in because, like I said, the shot was pretty terrible. There were a few moments that I left out of Natasha Trethewey that I wanted to include, but to be honest, and Shelli can attest to this, that interview was very emotional. Her book is about many things, but it's partly about the death of her mother at the hands of an abusive stepfather. And so that interview took a pretty long time, partly because she was crying through a lot of it. And I didn't want to, I think she was pretty sensitive to crying on camera. And I didn't want to include shots where she was actively in tears, even though I think a lot of people think of producers as being like, woo, those tears are gold. Like, that's good television. But I just didn't want to do that. And there was a moment that I left out where Shelli asked, who did you write this book for? Who was the audience for this book? And her response was so beautiful, like all of her responses, but she said she was writing it partly for people who don't understand domestic violence, because she was getting a lot of feedback after her book about people writing in saying, well, why didn't your mom just leave? And, she did. That's why he killed her. She left, and that's where the violence began. So that was one moment I left out, mainly because she was crying when she was saying it, and I didn't want to include it. And she also talks about it. Who else the book is for is for people who lost a loved one. And that was a really beautiful moment that I wish I could have put in, but I had reservations about doing that.
Mm-hmm. Have any of the authors responded to the documentary so far? So can you share any of their responses with us?
I haven't gotten any responses yet, although I haven't yet sent them. I wanted to send them an email because I finally separated each of their individual segments. So I wanted to send them to the artists or the writers personally and see if maybe we get a response then. I'm not sure. I should have been more active in sharing it with them specifically, but I didn't. So no.
They will see it eventually, and I'm sure they will be pleased.
I feel like they're busy, and they'll like get to it when they get to it.
As we're coming to a close here, I'll start with you, Shelli. I know you work with community engagement. You're working on a new project now that could probably have like some kind of similarities to what you just did. Can you explain that to us, what you're working on now?
Yes. So I'm currently working on a project focused on racism as a public health crisis. And so with this project, we are partnering with different organizations to think about how we're really going to solve for racism as a public health crisis. Also, the health team is producing content that really is speaking to and helping our community understand how racism is interwoven within our system and specifically within the healthcare system. And I think some similarities is it's really both of these projects speak to and allow people to get a better understanding of diversity and equity and inclusion and what that means in different fields and what it means and how it impacts our lives daily. Since the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards is really talking about topics of cultural difference within the different books, and at the same time, the racism as a public health crisis, connecting the dots is the official title of it, is also helping people to explore and understand sometimes cultural difference, but especially the impacts of racism in our community. And so that's where I see some similarities. Also, I think one similarity can be that both of them are really engaging projects and hopefully is bringing people in to not only learn, but to explore, and hopefully is a small window into another person's life that will make a difference for whomever is watching.
Very good. Mary, I know you're not working on anything big specifically, but I know you keep busy. But if you had a choice of your next big project, what would it be?
Ooh, I like this question. I really, I mean, I have to say, doing the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards kind of got me hooked on doing more long form video or documentary. So I think I'd like to work on a long form documentary project. And I love the themes of the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards. I think they're so important. So I'd love to do another long form documentary. I'm also interested in doing podcasts. I'd like to try my hand at that because I think there's a lot of similarities in, you know, the things that I do, like long form documentaries and doing podcasts. I think I could be good at that. So something like that would be an ideal next project, I guess.
Well, good. So hopefully the powers that be are listening to you, and they'll assign you to that. Real quick, both of you, if asked to do this again next year for the 87th Anisfield Wolf Book Awards, are you two all in? Or are you burnt out? Or it's like someone else have it? What do you think?
Oh, I mean, I will.
So I'm all in. I think that's the simple answer. But specifically for me, I enjoyed this experience so much that often I'm like, Mary, propose something with me on it again. Maybe we can get
Same, exactly the same. I mean, it was such a joy to work with Shelli on this project, and I hope we get to work together again. And I will do, like, you know, the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards, like the 110th Anisfield Wolf Book Awards. I will do. I hope. I would love to.
Well, good. That's really good to hear that both of you are passionate about your work, and you know, whenever you create a project, you're, you know, extending a part of yourself to the rest of the viewers, which is really great. We appreciate that. Well, Mary Fecteau, producer, Shelli Reeves, associate producer on this wonderful piece. Thank you both very much for joining us today, and wishing you both all the best.
Thank you. This was a treat.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you to our audience for joining us for this important conversation. For more information about CIFF Streams and Anisfield Wolf Book Awards program, please visit clevelandfilm.org or anisfield-wolf.org. I'm Eric Siler. Thank you.